Welcome to another episode of Entrepreneur Mind Speak. I'm Lauren with Creme de Mint, a branding and packaging design agency. And I'm here with Natalie, my co-host.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm the founder of Cloud Create. We're a web design and development company specializing in Shopify based in Tampa.
And today we're here to welcome Annette Malkin. Thank you so much for being here, Annette.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, us too. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your journey into PR and marketing and what led you to found Culturewise Collective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out my career in New York City. I've been working in public relations and communications for the past 20 years, working at a mid-sized PR firm that specialized in national lifestyle PR. And I primarily worked with Fortune 500 companies and kind of some household names like TAZO Tea, Altoids, Amazon, Red Bull, Tabasco, and Tequila Don Julio, as well as other spirits. But I mentioned Tequila Don Julio because I was part of that inaugural PR team that helped launch the brand in the US. And so after about 10 years in New York, I relocated to Miami. And at that point, I had started running the agency's US Hispanic practice. So it was really great to build something from scratch and add another offering to the agency's services as well as another revenue stream. So in many ways at that time, it was like running an agency within an agency. And after 16 years at that agency and becoming a mom of 2 young children, I realized that I needed a change if I wanted to be a more present parent for my young kids. And so the best professional decision that I made was going on my own and launching my own company. I mean, just to be able to decide who your clients are, how to set boundaries and parameters just really helped my work-life balance and made me just a better partner, mother, professional, and boss, and also the ability to choose who I work with, because I am proud to say that I work with some of the best communicators and storytellers in the business. And then at Culturewise, we focus on small to mid-sized companies. So our sweet spot is, food and beverage, wine and spirits, travel and hospitality, and we are getting more involved with the adult non-alcoholic beverage space, which is booming. And we are headquartered in Miami. We have a footprint across the country, but we also have some colleagues in Europe. So we do help brands enter the US market from Europe and Latin America, as well as American brands that want to launch and expand globally in Europe and Mexico. So not only because we have boots on the ground, but because we really do understand the culture, and particularly in the alcohol industry, there are so many local regulations that vary that it's just important to know someone who knows those nuances.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the services that you provide? Because I think PR can be a little bit ambiguous for a lot of people. So what does that mean from your agency? Like what campaigns or things might you put together to help these brands?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, because you're right. We talk to a lot of founders who don't quite get PR. So we are a full service integrated communications agency. And what that means is a lot of people might think of public relations as just publicity, right? Which is working with journalists to get editorial coverage about your brand. And that is essentially PR, but the industry is changing quite a bit. And we're seeing a lot of influencer and content creator content being created, and that becoming primary news source for a lot of people. So we do work in influencer campaigns and working with spokespeople to help deliver brand messaging or to create new news for the brands. We do strategic partnerships, and we think that this is particularly interesting for craft brands or small entry brands, because sometimes you can't create the news or do the campaign on your own. So by having a partner who aligns with your brand values, you can kind of share the cost and create a greater publicity for the brand. We also do branding. So we have most recently worked with brands who want to nail down their brand story before they launch. And so that's important because typically brands come to us after they've already done that. But by having input in the brand story and the narrative from the get-go, we ensure that we have a good story to tell to press, because, you know, at the end of the day, for PR folks, press is our primary gatekeeper. And if we can't cut through them, then our message, you know, can't get through to the consumer ultimately. We also help with event sponsorships, identifying the right partners for brands. So yeah, those are, we also do a bit of social media and digital marketing as well. So a little bit of everything when it comes to communications.
That's really incredibly comprehensive for, especially for new brands, to be able to have that breadth of help. I think is very, very important for startups, because it can be very overwhelming.
Yes, absolutely.
What should brands entering the US or expanding globally, what should they keep in mind?
So our recommendation would be with work with partners that know the culture in those markets that you're entering and also know the regulations, especially with an industry like wine and spirits, right? That's so highly regulated. You know, the playbook that the brand used in the US might not work abroad and vice versa, right? So even brands from Latin America may think that they know the US Hispanic consumer because they have a shared language, but there are nuances, right, between the demographic that you might miss. Geography plays a big role, nationality, acculturation, right? And that could make a big impact on driving awareness or growth. So you want to get it right from the beginning.
I'm sure a lot of brands have wasted a lot of energy, money, and efforts going about that the wrong way.
Yeah, and when you're a small brand, every dollar counts, right?
Absolutely. And obviously, you've worked with these amazing larger alcohol brands like Tequila Don Julio. What would you say is kind of a difference in alcohol, since that's become kind of a specialty for you, versus other consumer goods?
Yeah, well, from a PR perspective, and I think in general, communications and marketing, is that we need to ensure that we are strictly marketing to folks that are of legal drinking age, right? So in the US, that's 21 plus. And so recently, TikTok updated its US policy for ads. So now alcohol brands can place ads, but they need to place them in media where at least 73.8% of the audience is 21 plus, right? And so the same holds for, you know, broadcast segments when you're doing PR. And also because I started my career in working with two of the industry global leaders, so I worked across Pernod's whiskey portfolio and then several Diageo brands, like you mentioned, Tequila Don Julio. I also worked with Zacapa, Johnny Walker, and a few others. They have strict marketing codes that often are stricter than what the industry or a governing body like Discus or something would regulate. So, you know, all of the communication has to promote social responsible drinking. They can't make health claims, and you also can't promote an alcohol with another vice. So, for example, cigar and whiskey pairings are a very natural thing, right? So you might want to do a pairing with a cigar company or do some content around that. But that is something that you can't combine two vices, whereas other CPG brands don't need to worry about that and those kind of regulations and nuances. So those are just a few of the differences that we would see with spirits brands, wine brands, and other CPGs.
And talking a little bit further about these strict regulations for alcohol, PR, and marketing, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs navigating these challenges while building their brand presence?
I would say, you know, you should probably seek out an attorney, right, who knows the regulations and can do a training for your team if it's something that you're going to do in-house, right? Or find an agency partner, a consultant that knows the ins and outs of the alcohol beverage, of compliance, of the standards for social media, just because this can avoid any fines down the road or having to take down content. And sometimes, you know, the smaller brands maybe are at less risk of getting caught, but you should just get in the habit of doing things the right way. It would be a waste of resources, a time and effort to just start off with best practices, I would say.
And can you give us like a few of those type of instances that people might run into when they're marketing their alcohol brand? Like if they're a startup and they're, new to this, what kinds of things have you seen that are big no-nos, and what kinds of things can entrepreneurs like think like, I don't know, give us some tips.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things that we've seen primarily in social media is when a craft brand gets a new retailer or a new account, and they post about it. Like, we're now available at Total Wines, right? And they post it and they post the logo. And so there is a regulation where it's like the rule of three. So whenever you promote retailers or on-premise accounts, like wherever you're listed on the cocktail menu, you want to make sure that you list at least of three, because that promotional value is something of value that you're giving the account. And as alcohol brands, you can't show preference toward your customers, your retailer. So that's one that we often see. And even with PR, like when we're pitching recipes of where you can find, this product at a place near you, we always ask our clients, give us at least 3 of the accounts. Or, for gift guides, when we're pitching it for holiday gift guides, Mother's Day gift guides, let us know 3 of the off-premise retailers that carry your product, because we want to share those 3. And in addition to, a lot of brands now launch with their e-commerce in addition to their e-commerce as well. So that would be a common one that we see. And then things like visuals, I guess, with anything that having to do with a car, right? Because of drinking and driving, anything that imagery that looks like it's targeting or trying to market to someone below the drinking age. Those are some common ones.
I love that you're bringing up the drinking age regulation, because I feel like not even necessarily with alcohol, but it's definitely been something with these vice type products where you're like, that doesn't really seem like something above the age of 21 that would be interested in that, or above 18 or whatever the age is. So I kind of love that that you pay a lot of attention to these regulations, because not only is it better for the consumer, but for the brand itself too. You don't want to, down the line have a scandal because you realize that your ad accidentally targeted, younger people, or accidentally or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with the partners, like with content creators, making sure that whoever you partner with, you get the metrics of their community, right? To make sure that the majority is of drinking age. Also age gating, you see that on the websites, you see kind of the disclaimers on the social media handles of a lot of craft brands mentioning like must be 21 plus to follow. So all of that are little things that are important to get right at the beginning.
Absolutely. And you'd mentioned already storytelling a little bit at the beginning, especially when it comes to like building the brand from the start. How do you do that with your clients? How do you kind of implement that into everything else you're doing?
Yeah, like I mentioned, sometimes brands come to us and they think they're ready for the external communication. They're like, we've got our brand story, we've got our website up. And so that was probably the biggest adjustment for us and for the team, because a lot of us came from the background of working with of bigger brands, and so we weren't working with the person whose family legacy, whose name was attached to it, right? But entrepreneurs pour their heart and soul into a brand, and they're very invested. It's very personal, and so it's important sometimes to branch out and get an outside perspective, because sometimes they may be too close to the messaging and too passionate about it. So, particularly in craft spirits, it's become so competitive. There are branches that are launching daily. And so media, right? Bartenders, they're being inundated with new brands to try, and why this one's better than that one, or how it's different and innovative. And so, I mean, last year alone, our boutique agency spoke to about 15 brands that were new to world brands. So they hadn't launched yet. The majority were agave spirits, and particularly tequila. So that's a lot of brands to launch, So we always tell, especially during these discovery calls when we're getting to learn about the brand, is that, consumers are gonna remember stories about the place. So if you have something in particular about your provenance, an experience tied, not so much the tasting notes or production details, in terms of how many distillation runs or anything like that. So it's just, you definitely want that because bartenders, right, the more professional trade is going to ask you those questions as well as media, but you want to find the right balance, I think, in your storytelling between making that emotional connection to the consumer while still having, some functional messaging in your back pocket. And then you also want to evoke a feeling, I think, like where do you want that person transported or thinking about when they're enjoying your product? So I would say that's probably some good guidelines in terms of the storytelling, and test it out even if you don't have the budget, to do some market research with an outside party. Test it out with some people who fit your target consumer to make sure that it's resonating.
Just to talk a little bit more about the storytelling, is there a brand that you feel like has done this really well that you're always looking towards?
I would say that one that jumps out is Brothers Bond Bourbon because it's a celebrity-owned brand, right? But they also launched with being a B1 corporation, supporting regenerative farming. There's just so many other layers to the story, right? And not to generalize, but sometimes there's a stigma with a celebrity. Oh, another celebrity brand, and they've managed to overcome that with having, of course, a good product, but then these other things. So I think, when you think about, sustainability or the founder pieces, that's one that came to mind when you asked.
What social media platforms are most effective for alcohol brands today, and how should entrepreneurs tailor their strategies for each platform?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head in terms of having a strategy for each because we each go on there, right, for different reasons. And of course, it's easier and more efficient just to blanket out, the same message across all the platforms. And there could be this desire, oh, if I'm not on all of them, I'm missing out an opportunity. But sometimes if you can't do it right, it's better maybe not to be across all of the platforms. So I think now that the TikTok has introduced this new policy, allowing alcohol brands. I think it's still too early, but I'd be curious we'll see if it does for this category, what it's done for other industries, right? In terms of the TikTok shops and really driving consumption for brands and seeing that direct link to sales. Instagram is another great platform because, storytelling isn't just narratives, but it's also very visual. And this is a platform that allows brands to share both that functional and emotional that we talked about, that storytelling piece. So you can share cocktail recipes, provenance photos, and also, like where it comes from, who's making it, but also lifestyle and aspirational photos. So I think that, Instagram is one that is very digestible and shareable as a platform. And then for craft brands, I also think that an underutilized tool is LinkedIn. And that's one that can have a lot of impact as you are growing your brand, and for B2B. So it's not only sharing your news, but it's also sharing category or industry news, like from an entrepreneur perspective, and then adding your brief point of view to that just really establishes that brand owner as a thought leader, which can also help to make them more mediable and kind of what we call in our industry a subject matter expert. One person that comes to mind that is doing that really well is the co-founder of Parch, and they are an RTD, no ABV beverage. And one of the co-founders, Isla, is constantly sharing articles about that category and just with her own take on it. And it's really caught the attention. And I think she gets a lot of engagement on LinkedIn. Other small things, right? What we tell our clients is that it's not just like the press coverage anymore that's going to make an impact. I know, Natalie, you asked earlier, people don't understand sometimes what PR is and isn't. And one of the things that actually comes up a lot is how is it going to help drive sales, and PR is not necessarily a sales driver, right? It is a awareness driver, an amplification driver, and a credibility driver, right? The sales is more on the marketing side of things. And so, but a way that PR can help is if you take that, original piece of coverage that runs and you amplify it across other channels. So reposting it on social, maybe putting some paid support behind it. So, tagging outlets and writers who write the stories, I think go a long way, particularly if the writers are freelancers. And we're seeing more of that shift. The newsrooms are getting smaller, if you will, and media outlets are relying more on freelancers. And that's a great way to solidify the relationship with an outlet and with a writer.
I love that you kind of clarified that too between the marketing and PR, because I do find it incredibly powerful to have a very strong PR presence that then the marketing can kind of run with. It comes across a lot more organic and natural because it's based on like a real part of the story or a real part of the journey of the brand that usually is kind of set by that PR presence. So I love that you kind of explained that a little bit, because I think you see a lot of marketing nowadays that feels a little bit empty sometimes, like if it's not fully thought through. But when you see brands that they really have a voice, that PR side of it has really been thought out, they're active in whatever their communities are, they're doing things, they're creating events. That's not necessarily a marketing function, but then when it gets promoted through marketing of like, hey, we did this thing, these people were helped or whatever, it brings so much more power to that brand. So I love that you're kind of thinking with that, because I think that the effectiveness in the marketing is going to be so much better with that background.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that credibility piece. You have that third party endorsement, assuming it's positive coverage, but typically it is. You have that third party endorsement from these experts, right? From these gatekeepers from media, that credentials, your brand. In other categories, right? We have the affiliate marketing, which has now taken off, and through that, you're seeing more direct sales. You can see the connective tissue between the PR and the sales. But because of the three-tiered system in alcohol, we don't really do the direct to consumer sales. So we haven't seen that take off. But, in fashion and beauty, I have friends that specialize in those industries from a PR perspective. And if they do those affiliate campaigns, and just to take a step back for those that don't know, what I'm talking about, but it's, traditional legacy media like Condé Nast, all these publications will have a campaign where if your product is included in their editorial coverage, there's a link back to purchase. And anyone that purchases the products as a result of reading that story, they have a commission that the publication will receive. And on the back end, you can see that data, you can see where the sale came from, and people have really I know that that's helped those folks working in those categories of PR really give value to our work, because sometimes it's like, okay, well, this article ran in the Miami Herald or in the New York Times, but I didn't see a sales lift, right? But again, it's more of that credentialing piece.
How could brands go about making sure that they have a social media strategy that's going to make sense with their products, that's going to target the right people? Do you have any tips for that?
First things first is brands need to really think about who their target consumer is, right? And then also think about their brand values and find partners that align with that, so that the messaging is organic. Even if it's a paid partnership, right? You want the messaging to come across as authentic. We always tell our clients, because a lot of the small brands are like, well, can we just send out the product? Can we just, seed it and see if they post about it? And we certainly can, but there's no guarantees, if there's going to be any amplification, and also what that messaging is. So when you do work with content creators to collaborate on content, and if you do have an agreement in place, you want to give creative control to the creator, the influencer, because there's a reason why you were drawn to them as a partner. So just provide some brand guidelines. You get to review the content, but really let the creative content come from them. Another thing that is key is longstanding relationships, maybe just picking a handful or one or two to really help. And after longstanding relationships, that can lead to maybe this content creator being at events or being more of a brand ambassador more than a one-off. I think we've read a statistic like people need to see a message, 3 or 4 times before it like really resonates or to make an impact. So the same thing should like a one-off post is really not going to move the needle, for a brand.
I noticed that you do specialize in purpose-driven campaigns. How can alcohol entrepreneurs align their brands with community values and cultural relevance to stand out in a competitive market?
It's really important to us, when for me, especially going on my own, was really working with brands that, want to make a difference in our communities. As a small brand, like perhaps you can't launch like a B Corp corporation or be giving back, a percentage of your revenue, but it can even just be the aspects of your brand story, where you're sourcing your materials or any sustainability practices or a cause that aligns with your core values, and the support can start small. I think it should always ladder back to the brand values and also what might resonate. Like, where is your consumer? What do they care about? And sometimes that might differ from the entrepreneur. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are tempted to kind of maybe kind of throw things up on the wall and see what sticks. But I think having a strategy out of the gate will help. And that should always be the brand's North Star, that goes with this purpose driven, but also, we talk a lot with brand owners who are often getting asked, oh, can I get a case for this event, and sampling here and sampling there. But I think the more you stick to your strategy and kind of have this criteria or filter every time you get a request or an influencer who wants to work with you, go back to that criteria and filter and kind of, does it check those boxes, and then does it feel like it's brand right?
It's really helpful for entrepreneurs because as an entrepreneur myself and being surrounded by so many entrepreneurs, I definitely feel like you get that sort of shiny object. Like I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do this. And you start spreading yourself too thin. And so having the criteria, the strategy to come back to and say, does this meet this criteria, will help them to focus and probably be more successful in the long run because they're keeping that focus on their strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that always comes up when we're doing our initial call with a prospective client is we'll ask who their target consumer is and if they've kind of nailed that down. And because that also dictates from us, if we're doing media relations for them, like what publications are we, going to target? What's a win? Um, and recently we've heard a lot of craft brand owners or executives saying like, we don't have, a target consumer. We don't want to pigeonhole ourselves at launch. That's kind of a big brand thing to do. And from our perspective, that's a miss, because as a small brand, you can't be all things to all people. So by having a razor focus and staying focused on a target audience is where we think that you'll have the biggest. It's kind of like creating like a groundswell, right? So you build a strong base of loyal consumers and then you can expand. But that initial base kind of becomes these unofficial brand ambassadors that will help spread the word and introduce the brands. And that's ultimately where you might see brand growth.
Yeah, I think that's super important to niche down. I mean, we're always telling that to all of our clients that come to us that, if they don't have a very targeted consumer, they need to really think about that because they can't be everything to everyone. It just then they're going to be nothing to no one. So
Right. Exactly.
Because on the one side, of course, you want to niche down and have that, as perfect as possible customer avatar. But then, of course, we also want to be diverse. We want to be inclusive. We want everybody to be able to feel comfortable kind of joining that group. So how do you balance that between having this exact persona that you're going for and also keeping everything inclusive and kind of welcoming for everybody as the United States and the whole world becomes a lot more diverse and everyone is a lot more mixed nowadays than in the past. So I'd love to hear from a PR perspective how you go about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So diversity, equity, inclusion is certainly a hot topic these days. But one of the core values of Culturewise is grounded in inclusive communications and marketing. We are a minority-owned, female-led company. Our team is largely bilingual, bicultural, so we understand, at firsthand the power that culture plays into purchasing decisions and driving brand loyalty. Hence, it's in our name, Culturewise. But similar to myself, many of my colleagues also specialized in U.S. Hispanic and multicultural communications. And when we worked on larger campaigns that were successful for global brands here in the US, many of them were grounded on cultural insights, so it was like grounded on a Hispanic insight, but it resonated with a mainstream audience, because even if that's not your culture, there is this curiosity, right, in the US to branch out and try different cuisines. It is such a melting pot. So, we do live, like you said, in a diverse community. Diversity is in the fabric of our culture. And so from our perspective, we always tell our clients that it's important that they market in a way that mirrors the communities that they serve. So it's not about checking boxes. It has to be authentic. But that is the mirror of the communities, right? Is diverse.
I love that. And I also love what you mentioned and why your name makes it's like the perfect name for your agency. Because actually taking these products that have whatever cultural background and then bringing that to light in the culture right now, making it more part of our culture, bringing all of the cultures kind of together so that maybe those that, aren't familiar yet with that culture get to try it and like experience that. I think that's so beautiful. That really is what we're all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that literal cultural is part of it, but it's also like pop culture too. That's oftentimes like when brands, like, what is happening in pop culture that a brand can align with, right? That makes sense for them. It's not just for the sake of it, but sometimes that's the way to make a bigger news splash. Insert yourself into the news cycle, or like news hacking is what we call it in our industry. But that's another way that small brands can get a bigger share of voice in the news as well, is tapping into pop culture.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure a lot of brand owners are not necessarily on top of those things because of how fast it moves. So having an agency that actually sees everything happening and is in the thick of it would be so helpful.
You are so right. You do have to act very quickly on those things, especially this day and age with social media and just digital news and all of it. Absolutely.
If a new brand is thinking that they need PR, at what point should they come to you? What point in their process? Like, where should they be before they reach out to you?
That's such a good question, and we get asked that a lot. So it just depends what part of PR communications you're looking for, right? Because like I said, brands come to us when they're just looking to solidify like their brand story, their brand values, and they're not ready for kind of external. We always say there should be an alignment internally. And one of the first things we do for clients is we create kind of this Q&A with all the types of questions that they might get asked from any one of their gatekeepers. So if it's, just to keep in line with wine and spirits, like what are they going to get asked by a bartender or a sales rep or whatnot? And we want some alignment on that. So there is some pre-work to do before you're ready to launch. But if what you're ready for is to launch with media relations, with publicity, then you want to have a strong market presence, right? Because it's a missed opportunity if someone reads about your product and then they can't find it right on the store shelves. And that's sometimes it's like, right, like the cart before the horse. We've talked to a few brands are like, well, we really want to get some of the press coverage so we can get attention of the sales rep, or we can bring in the coverage, when we go do our sales calls. But at the same time, you want to make sure you're available. And that can take a while to kind of see, that you're in a handful of accounts, you have a couple of cocktails, especially if you're launching locally, because that's what local media is looking for. It's usually, where can we find this drink, at a bar or restaurant in the area, versus like product spotlights. And then of course, if the person is a local small business owner, there might be the potential for a story about them. But to answer your question, I would say if it's for media relations, you want to make sure that you're out there and easy to buy, easy to find.
That makes sense. And how can people reach you if they're looking to work with you?
We have our website and we're on social media, LinkedIn and Instagram, culturewisecollective.com. Or you can also find me on LinkedIn, both on my personal page or our agency's page.
Awesome, awesome. And is there anything else you would like to share with our entrepreneurs before we jump off this call? Any other pitfalls, any other recommendations, anything else? Any last words?
What I would say is when you're ready to turn on the PR lights on, or even your social media, think about the long game. These things are long-term investments. These are not in and out strategies. I was actually just speaking to a colleague yesterday who specializes in tech. She was mentioning, that they have a client who just comes to them like twice a year. And it's just like you lose the momentum, right? Because from an editorial perspective, I've worked on a story where I've gotten interest from a writer, and it's taken nearly a year for the story to come to life, And so magazines, printed magazines tend to work 6 months in advance, right? So you have to keep that in mind. And with this pivot to more freelancers, which I mentioned earlier, they pitch their editors bite on the stories, but something might happen and that story gets held, right? They don't have control over it. So that's why we tell, it's the long game when it comes to PR. And also when you launch your social media channels, you got to be ready to invest in having high quality content being pumped out so that you can be relevant. It's kind of become like people's virtual business cards. It's the first place people go, I think, these days, versus your website. When you're a brand, is your social media, particularly your Instagram.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Well, thank you so much, Annette. We really appreciate you. And thank you for joining us today on another episode of Entrepreneur Minds Speak. And bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.